How many of you have ever gotten a question on why an all-good God would allow slavery to exist? You ever heard that one? That's very popular nowadays with certain atheists. Well, when we start looking at the practice of slavery in the Old Testament, we can find out some things. Raymond Westhook, in his book, it's The History of the Ancient Near East, looked at a neighboring nation called the Hittites. And here's what he wrote when he started talking about slavery. He says, Güterbach, which is another scholar, refers to slaves in the strict sense, quote unquote, apparently referring to chattel slaves such as those of classical antiquity. Chattel slaves would be slaves like you would see in the Old South, slaves that people owned. But he basically goes on to say that that kind of slavery wasn't practiced in the mid-Near East, the Hittites, the Israelites, folks like that. That wasn't the kind of slavery that they were involved with. He said this characterization may have been valid for house slaves whose master could treat him as he wished when they were at fault. But it is less suitable when they were capable of owning property and could pay betrothal money or fines. So imagine a slave that could pay his own fine, he could own his own property. Are we really still talking about slave in the sense that we think about it? He goes, the meaning servant seems to be more appropriate, or perhaps a designation of semi-free person as opposed to a full chattel slave. It comprises every person who is subject to orders or dependent upon another, but nonetheless has a certain independence within his own sphere of activity. So when we start looking at how slaves actually lived in those days, and we find out, wow, slaves could own land and they could draw a salary and they could, be responsible for paying off fines and paying off things. So Israelite slaves are not necessarily the same category as, say, African American slaves in the antebellum South. They're two different things. It's kind of like, what we had serfdom or sharecropping, that kind of thing. There's a difference there. And that's what we see.